All right, welcome back to the program. We're in the studio with Felix Ofosu, who is presidential spokesperson and MP for Abrasebu Kwamankese constituency. Felix, so let's get into the economy. I earlier on, gave you a hint about the dollar, the performance of gold board that has come in that I think a lot of noise is being made about it, and that is what has actually propelled this economy into where we are today. Let us understand exactly what the issue, how this performance happened.
Well, I think there's no doubt that in the lead up to the 2024 elections, the biggest ticket item was the economy. And the generality of the Ghanaian people had simply had enough of the suffering under the Akufo-Addo administration, which had completely mismanaged the economy, ran it down, essentially collapsed our currency, collapsed our economy, had saddled us with unsustainable debt, had in fact defaulted on debt repayments. Inflation was skyrocketing. The cost of living was escalating on a daily basis, and people simply could not make ends meet. So President Mahama rightly promised that he was going to take a serious look at the Ghanaian economy, reform it, salvage it from the doldrums in which it was, and ensure that the cost of living comes down so that we reduce hardships. And true to his word, since we've been in power, we spared no effort to ensure that this happens. Now, one of the biggest contributory factors to the problem we had with the economy, the hardships and the escalating prices, was the instability in the Ghanaian currency. At a point, sometime in 2022, the dollar rose by astronomical margins against the cedi. The cedi moved from 6 cedis in July to 17 cedis in November. And this created severe hardships for the people of Ghana. In fact, as of January, when we came into power, if you did a transaction on the OP market, you could get a dollar for anything between 16 to 17 cedis. So this was a problem, and that is because we are a country that significantly depends on imports. Many of the things that we need, the essential things that we need on a daily basis, are imported. So when importers go to imports and the cedi has depreciated, they need to take more cedis to buy perhaps the same amount of dollars. And because they are in business to make a profit, when they come, they pass it on, the additional cost, onto the consumer, like you and I. And that is what was accounting for the daily rise in the price of goods and services. So if we were going to stem that tide, it was absolutely imperative that we controlled the exchange rate and bring it to a level that was acceptable. Now, how are we going to do it? The dollar or any other foreign currency is like any other commodity on the market. The more of it you have, the less expensive it is. So the problem we've had over the years is that we have not had sufficient foreign exchange to meet our needs. So it was necessary to create a system that gives us sufficient foreign exchange at all times to be able to use to do the things that we need to do so that prices don't get out of hand. Now, in opposition, in fact, in 2020, we promised to establish the Gold Board, which essentially was going to be the lead government agency that controls gold purchase and export. What was happening is that there are people involved in small-scale mining who mine gold and go out of their way to sell it on the market and keep the proceeds. The proceeds don't come to a center. Government, the Bank of Ghana, have no control over it. And yet, we are in dire need of dollars and other foreign currencies. So what the Gold Board essentially does is that they mop up gold produced by small-scale miners. They buy it in cedis, and then they export to obtain dollars. When they obtain the dollars, they give it to the Bank of Ghana. That puts part of it in its reserves, puts part of it on the forex market for people who need it. And then part of it goes to government to meet its obligations that are in foreign currency. So it is because of this arrangement that there is a liquidity on the foreign exchange markets. Indeed, only last month alone, $1.1 billion came into the country through gold exports by the Gold Board. The previous 4 months.
So currently, it has no competitor.
The Gold Board is a state entity, it's a monopoly, it's the only entity that has the authority to purchase gold for export. In fact, in addition to small-scale miners, as of the last recording, there were 7 large-scale mining companies that sold 20% of the gold they produce they ceded it to the gold board. In fact, there are discussions to bring on board an additional 9 large-scale mining companies who would also give a certain portion of the gold they produce to gold board. When that happens, they are able to export and get much-needed foreign currency to ensure that our reserves at the Bank of Ghana are in good shape. And as I speak to you, the Bank of Ghana, if I'm not mistaken, has reserves that are getting close to $12 billion, which is significant, the highest we've had in this country's history. At the same time, they have enough.
But that means that the Bank of Ghana can support some struggling state institutions, even though he has declared a 0%.
No, the Bank of Ghana is not allowed to finance governments.
I know.
That leads to inflation. They are simply not allowed by their law.
Okay.
If you want forex from the Bank of Ghana, you go and buy it, like any other commodity. That's all. But the Bank of Ghana cannot take money from their votes and give to government, as they did under the Akufo-Addo administration, which led to a 63 billion Ghana cedi loss.
Yes, I mean, I know.
Which was an earth-shattering loss, never experienced in the history of Ghana. So they are simply not allowed to do that. Then we have committed ourselves to limiting the Bank of Ghana to monetary policy and not the financier or the cashier or the printer of government, as it were. So once the cedi gains strength.
So I'm not going to mention any state institution, but state institutions that are calling for the support of the Bank of Ghana to rescue them from their debt that's swallowing them.
No, the Bank of Ghana is not. The Bank of Ghana has a policy of providing emergency liquidity support.
Yes.
They can advance money to you, but it is only a loan. You pay back. So it is up to you to engage them.
Agree.
Yeah, to agree on the terms, and then they will advance it to you. It's part of their.
Okay.
They do that to bail out banks that are in difficulty. But those are short term.
Okay.
Facilities that they extend to banks, but they are not freebies. They have to be paid back.
Okay.
So that must be placed on record. But I was making the point that once the cedi gains strength, it cascades and dovetails into everything else. So people who import are now compelled to reduce the price of the items because they don't need as much cedis as they did before to get the same amount of goods. And that's why you find that there are industries, some in the brewery sector, who have actually reduced their prices. Indeed, I just found out only yesterday or the day before that iron rods, a ton of iron rods, has reduced from close to 9,000 Ghana cedis in January this year to around 7,000 Ghana cedis in some places. There are other items too that have reduced in price. Fuel prices have fallen 8 consecutive times since the beginning of this year because the importers, the bulk distribution companies, import crude oil with foreign currency. And they need to mop up cedis to be able to buy that foreign currency to import. So if they need less cedis now than they did before, it will translate into price because 3 things account for fuel prices. The first one is the price of the commodity on the market. The next is the exchange rate. The exchange rate also influences the price because, for instance, if you buy fuel at $100 a barrel and you buy 80 barrels, so you are talking about $8,000. However, if you buy it at $80 and you still bring in 80 barrels, you are talking of about, let's say, 96 or 9, sorry, you are talking about less than $8,000, as it were, because of the way that the currency has been. Now, if you need the cedi equivalent of $8,000 in January, is higher than the cedi equivalent of $8,000 today.
Yes.
So because of that, the price of fuel will drop. And then there are taxes.
Yes,
the
but
taxes
there's also the issue of the price of fuel on the world market itself.
But I'm saying that is impacted by the exchange rate. For instance, if the exchange rate at the beginning of this year was 16 cedis to $1,
yeah.
So you have 16 cedis to $1, and you are bringing in, let's say, 1,000 barrels of crude oil. It will cost you $16,000 to do so. Understand me? If, for instance, you need 1 cedi, you need $1, and it costs you 16 cedis. And let's say the price of crude oil is $1 on the market, so you need 16,000. If you are bringing the same quantity, and it is still $1, but this time it is 10.5. You need $10,500 to do so.
Yeah.
Or 10,500 cedis, I beg your pardon, to do so. Now, if you are spending 16,000 and now you are spending 10,500, surely it will affect the price at the pump. And that is how come fuel prices have come down. So that is the impact that the foreign exchange has. Even if the world market price rises marginally, but the exchange rate goes down, the overall effect will be a downward trend because it will cost the importer less to import. That is why exchange rate is perhaps it is the most vital component of fuel pricing, and that is why you see it reflected. Once fuel prices come down, transport operators also are then compelled to bring down their fares, and that's how come the GPRTU agreed to do a 15% drop in their prices. Once that also goes down, those who use transport to bring in goods to sell also pay less transportation fares, and that also means then that they have to reduce their fares. So it has a certain knock-on effect across the market, and that is how you reduce hardship. So everybody will testify that things are less expensive now than they were at the beginning of this year.
So this has been all the effort of this government.
Absolutely.
Nothing international.
First of all,
no international factor, as we've
mentioned,
international
Trump
factor? And his handle with
because if
countries.
you go to a neighboring country, Nigeria, for instance, the naira has been crashing. So it's the same global environment, not so. Or do Trump's policies affect only Ghana and not other countries in the world? So it is not due to anything that Trump has done. It is due to deliberate effort by this government to manage the currency and manage the. And it's not only the currency we are managing. We are taking care of inflation. So now inflation is lower than we met. We met at 23%. Now it is 18%. Only this morning, it has emerged that growth, the economy has grown by 5.3% in the first quarter compared to 4.9% in the last quarter. So indications are that the economy will grow higher than was anticipated at the beginning of this year. If you look at other indicators like the deficit, which measures the difference between your expenditure and revenue, it is coming down. The primary balance, which is the most important indicator in this whole IMF program, because it is the thing that shows whether you are being prudent or not. And as I've had cause to say before, the fundamental principle of economic management is that you don't spend beyond your means. Once you don't do that, you are not going to fall into debt. If you look at the primary balance, the NPP left a primary balance of negative 3.9. That is, if you take our revenue and expenditure and deduct interest payment or debt service, which is statutory, it's obligatory, you can't do anything about it. That is what shows you how you have managed your revenue and how you have managed your expenditure. Currently, as I speak to you, at the last reckoning by the Bank of Ghana, it emerged that by the end of April, the primary balance is now showing a surplus of 0.3. Meanwhile, we've committed ourselves to doing a surplus of 1.5% at the end of this year. So we are clearly on course to achieving that.
By the end of this year.
By the end of this year. Yeah, but these are first quarter figures. So the second, and there's every indication that the second quarter figures will reflect
all things
going to reflect this trend. You also see that the finance minister is controlling expenditure. He's not spending and now the president and the finance minister have insisted that no government project, no government purchase can be done without a commencement certificate. That forces you to stick within your budget. You can't do anything outside of the budget. So for instance...
So when we have a program like 24-hour economy, finally rolled out, what's going to happen?
So the 24-hour economy, as we explained, is supposed to ensure that our economy runs throughout the day, throughout the night, so that the economy never sleeps. When you do that, you have economic expansion. There's more economic activity. More economic activity means
higher productivity.
Higher productivity. Higher productivity also means more money. More money. Simply put. Because, for instance, if Metro TV, you run a 12-hour shift, and people can advertise only from morning to the time that you close, you get a certain amount of money. But if you can operate outside of those 12 hours and extend by another 12 hours, and you get additional advertising, that is more money for you. Is that not the case? So you are then able to invest in your systems, expand, and then the cycle repeats itself, you make more money. So that is what the 24-hour economy is all about. It's also geared towards generating additional employment, because unemployment, I would argue, was perhaps the second most important issue in the elections that we just had. And you notice that a lot of young people supported the NDC and voted for President Mahama because they were dissatisfied with the lack of action on the part of the previous government and were convinced about the propositions that President Mahama was making. And therefore, if you have a 24-hour economy and companies are running around the clock, it means that they will have room for more hands. And that means that there will be more employment. That's why we say 1 3. So it's one job. There are 3 shifts. So you need 3 people to do it. Now, away from that too, there have been tangible, concrete job creation programs. So Ejumera, which is an entrepreneurial and business incubation program aimed at targeting 10,000 people and setting up 2,000 businesses this year. Then there's a national apprenticeship program, which targets 500,000 artisans in the next 4 years. Now, if you look at our unemployment figures, we have close to 2 million people who are unemployed. Now, if we are able to take out 500,000 people and give them skills and equip them to set up their own businesses and trades permanently, you've knocked off a significant chunk of the unemployment roster. And that is a very significant
the challenge
development.
with government is how our inability to continue those programs.
Why
Every
not?
government comes in.
Why not? I'm sure there have been efforts. There have been efforts in that regard in the past. But what you are going to see is more consistent dedication and more resource allocation to the program, so that more people can be trained that way and they will find employment. If you train somebody to be a hairdresser, and I have a practical experience of this, because between 2020 and 2024, when I was contesting for elections in AAK, over 2,000 young people benefited from a similar program that I initiated. I gave them sewing machines, I gave some hair dryers, some I gave barbering equipment, and other equipment and tools, so that they can be trained. And once you train the person and you've given the person a machine, she is going to sew clothes for people in the neighborhood who will pay for her services. So through that, she's able to fend for herself, and she will not require government to give her another job. If you come to education, for instance, we've implemented the no fee stress policy. The last time I gave an update, over 41,000 people had accessed the portal, which was open for people to register, and I've actually finished their registration. I suspect that disbursement will start sometime this year. That is what the Student Loan Trust Fund folks told us, and I believe that they will do so. If you look at the policy that we introduced on what do you call it, curbing period poverty, the free sanitary pad project is ongoing. I believe that the initial stages targets about 3 million girls, and they are being given sanitary towels to take care of themselves during that time of the month. So this government is doing a lot, and all these expenditures are clearly catered for in the national budget. So you will find that there will be significant limitation on budgeted expenditure, such that we will not expose ourselves to huge deficits, which then lead to the incurring of huge debts. That is how you manage an economy, so that things don't get out of hand and you don't fall back into the cyclical period of hardship.
So we're expecting that if you are alluding this to effective and prudent government economic management,
sure,
then should fuel prices on the world markets go up, we can still work within our capacity as a government.
Of course, you know that in the downstream sector, there's what we call full deregulation. So it is the market forces that are at play. So there are three factors: the cost of the world market price of crude oil, or oil or petroleum products that they bring in, the exchange rate, that is the rate at which they need to exchange the cedi for the dollar, and then taxes. Now, often taxes are stable, they hardly change, but the exchange rate is the one that is volatile. But if the price of crude oil or petroleum products don't rise beyond a certain level, you are still going to have some stability. Often, because of the way we've done it, even if there are increases, they are very marginal, small, as opposed to doing huge increases because you fail to do it within a certain period. So we don't anticipate that fuel will become more expensive than it was. What is certain is that for the foreseeable future, fuel will remain cheaper than it was in January this year when we took over. Yes. And that is how important the exchange rate is.
If you can touch on the energy sector levy that we're dealing with now.
Yes, I think that we've had cause to explain that it was a difficult decision. It was not a decision that we took lightly. We appreciate the concerns that Ghanaians have expressed, but it was necessary in order for us to overcome what is the biggest danger to this economy, which is the energy sector. The energy sector has suffered from historic mismanagement, especially under the previous administration. They did things that have incurred huge debts. We came to meet a total debt profile of 67 billion Ghana cedis in the energy sector. This must be paid for. Otherwise, it becomes something that hangs over the sector.
It's 80 billion now.
Yes.
According to the energy
because
minister.
More of it is on earth, but what is on record as of now is 67 billion. Now, it is not that government has waited to impose a levy before it can pay down this debt. In the budget this year, the finance minister has allocated 23 billion Ghana cedis to pay off part of that debt. But in addition to the debt itself, which has built up over time, is a continuous accrual of debt, because electricity is not sold for the price at which it is generated. For many years, the honest truth is that the price that we pay for electricity does not reflect the cost of producing it. The Akufo-Addo government took a decision that they were not going to factor in the cost of buying fuel to fire our thermal plants and the cost of capacity charges. So what you and I pay does not include those, but the fuel must be bought. It is government that must buy the fuel. It costs $1.2 billion annually to do so. In fact, already this year, the finance minister has had to give the energy ministry $300 million to import fuel to fire thermal plants. If it continues, we will need $1.2 billion. Now, this is not money that is readily available. So if government does not do something about it and find a way to finance it, it will create fuel shortages, which will then affect our ability to produce electricity, which will then mean that we have to do power rationing, which has its own implications for the people of Ghana. The hardship it brings, the discomfort, the heat, the darkness, and the low productivity, because it cripples the manufacturing sector, it cripples the industrial sector, it cripples the economy in its entirety. And we cannot afford to allow that to happen, because the consequences will be severe, they will be grave, they will impact us very, very adversely. That is why this has become necessary. But it is not a levy.
D-levy was not necessary.
No, but the levy was a product of self-inflicted mismanagement. The Akufo-Addo administration I have given you evidence of how we are managing the economy and avoiding the sort of debts that they incurred. They mismanaged the economy. If you look at their deficits, they did 3 or 4 consecutive years of double-digit deficits. They increased our debt from 120 billion to 750 billion Ghana cedis, which then meant that no amount of money they had was going to be enough to run the country, because debt servicing was huge. In fact, they got to a point where they told people who they had borrowed money from that they could not pay. That's why they gave Ghanaians those harsh haircuts, which completely destabilized many families, because their source of income, which was the proceeds of bonds, no longer came because government said they could not pay. It was at that moment that they became desperate and had to impose E-levy. So E-levy is significantly different. It was a result of mismanagement, which led to severe hardships for government and the people of Ghana. But this one, you see clear evidence of proper economic management, prudent use of resources. We are talking about a government whose president has said that he will cut allocation of fuel to government appointees. He says he won't allow anybody to go and subscribe to, satellite television at the expense of government. He has cut the number of ministries, cut the number of ministers, cut the number of political appointees at the president, so that we don't spend more money than is necessary. So the government itself, the president himself, I beg your pardon, is showing commitment to living frugally, not to waste the money of the people of Ghana. So you can be sure that any money that accrues out of this levy will be used for the specific purpose. We will account for it. Ghanaians will know periodically how much has come in and how much has been spent. But ultimately, what it will lead to is that it will ensure stable electricity supply. Also, this approach is a better option than making consumers pay through electricity bills. Because if we were to factor in the cost of fuel and capacity charges into electricity pricing, it will mean that we will pay 50% more than we are paying, which will be too much.
Which is realistic, though.
Too much. That would be the realistic target, but it will be too much for people to bear. So if you put it on fuel, the amount is lower, and then it is spread over a wider band. And that then means that we are able to address the problem in a way that is sustainable.
For what period are we expecting this?
First of all, the reason why we are even having to buy fuel is that whereas gas is cheaper, it costs just $10 per MMBTU. That is million British thermal units. That's how they measure the amount of gas that you use. The equivalent of that in oil is $61 per barrel of oil. So already it costs 6 times more if you use fuel than when you use gas. So ideally, if we had sufficient gas, we need about 600 million standard cubic feet a day of gas to be able to fire our thermal plants. And that will make electricity tariffs much cheaper. Currently, we have about 400 million standard cubic feet of gas a day. So we need between 150,000 to 200 more. As I speak to you, there are efforts to bring on board a second gas plant, subject to the availability of additional gas from the oil fields. There are also plans to increase gas intake from Nigeria so that we bridge that up. If that happens, we won't need to import fuel.
But we're not considering alternatives.
There are.
Yeah.
Of course,
I mean, that has been on the table.
Renewable energy.
Yes.
Renewable energy is one of the options that is being looked at. So more investment will go into solar energy, wind energy, and all those renewable energies that come at a cheaper cost over time than if you use fossil fuels. But in the interim, what we have is a heavy reliance on fossil fuels, on petrol, fuel, which is expensive. somebody has to pay for it. If we say that government should pay, it will be difficult for government to have the money to pay, and that would then lead to crippling power cuts, which we all do not want. So yes, as the president has said, it is not something that he did lightly. It was an absolutely necessary
and we're
step.
saying that we're ring-fencing what the revenue we're hoping to generate.
Of course.
We can trust government on
Absolutely,
that.
absolutely. But this is a government that has shown that it is trustworthy. We will render accounts. It will be open and transparent. When we set up ESLA, up on it until the time that we left, we managed it prudently. The MPP government came and completely mismanaged it. They applied hundreds of millions of it
This
to
is
paying
actually
pensions.
ESLA.
ESLA, yes.
This is ESLA.
It is an increase in ESLA.
Yes.
Yes, there's a component that is supposed to go to paying down the energy sector debt and purchasing fuel. And that is what we have increased by 1 cedi per litre. So it is a painful measure, but it is necessary. But I guess that the reason why we will have public confidence and public support is that we will manage it
It's when you are able to render accounts.
We will do so. There's no difficulty. In fact, the ESLA, as it exists now, has an accountability mechanism. The finance minister is supposed to account to Parliament every year on how ESLA funds have been utilized. So the same mechanism will be adopted to render accounts on how it has been utilized and what the gains have been since its implementation.
Yes. We have just about 1 minute to wrap up, but can you say a word or two to us about Galamsey? What have you done so far?
Yes, I think that
with the
Act.
I think compared,
compared to the period preceding our coming into government, there has been an improvement in the situation because of a consistent effort by this government to tackle the problem wherever it rears its head.
Where is that improvement?
But it is clear, it is obvious. You see the actions of duty bearers. You see the police, the military, the lands ministry, and all other players towards addressing it. Only 2 days, was it yesterday or the day before? There was a report of how some illegal operators in Galamsey had set up an illegal fuel station to provide fuel for the machines that they use, which has been destroyed. Last month or so, it emerged that a village where thousands of people were living and who engaged in Galamsey has essentially been dismantled. It doesn't exist anymore. They have been flashed out.
But that's not an improvement. That's efforts.
No,
You're making
no,
efforts.
But no, Annie. If in the past people could build fuel stations to provide fuel for the machines they use to engage Galamsey.
Specifically for Galamsey.
Absolutely. And today it is not there. That clearly means that the Galamsey they are doing, at least in that location, is not going to continue.
You are continuing the fight.
But there's an improvement because in the past, there were thousands of people living in a village who were doing Galamsey. If they don't exist anymore, Galamsey will reduce. You've also seen arrests. Indeed, in the last few months that we've been in power, close to 200 excavators have been seized. Vehicles have been seized.
But more specifically, is the law, what you said.
Just a minute. Over 80 people have been arrested. Indeed, there's a new policy. In the last 2 weeks alone, 1,250 excavators were imported, all of which have been impounded at the port. There's actually going to be a law which says that if people who import excavators don't get licenses, permits, they cannot import it. To get a permit, you must show that it is going to activities other than Galamsey. If you cannot justify why you are bringing in the excavator, if you don't show documents, evidence that you are a construction company or some company that has use for the excavator and that it is not going to go into Galamsey, you will not even be allowed to import it, let alone clear it at the ports. So this is a significant measure aimed at curbing Galamsey. As for the law, there is an LI which essentially contains regulations regulating an activity that is provided for by law, which is mining in forest reserves. So as I speak, it is lawful to mine in forest reserves, except that you must do it in compliance with law. So there are large-scale companies, the Newmonts of this world, who are operating in forest reserves. The concern is that they should not go into forest reserves in the first place. That is one category of people. They are mining responsibly. They are able to reclaim the land because they have the capacity and the wherewithal and technology to do so. Then there are illegal miners who are simply destroying the environment and have entered forest reserves to do same. So currently, the position is that you cannot do it unlawfully.
But that's not what we're told.
No, but if you listen to me, the LI enables people to do something.
Illegal activity.
No, the LI enables people to do lawful mining in forest reserves.
Okay.
That is what it is. If you repeal it today, nothing regulates lawful mining in forest reserves. The way to do it is that in the airline, the president is giving power to grant licenses for people to mine lawfully in forest reserves. We are taking out that power. So the president can no longer do so. Apart from those doing it now, no new persons can go and do it. And then there's a Minerals and Mining Act, which is going to be amended to make it impossible for anybody to mine in forest reserves, whether legal or illegal. That is a comprehensive way of addressing the problem. And that is what we have sought to tell the people of Ghana, so that they appreciate that we are going to keep the promise that we made. We are going to even do more than we actually promised by putting in place robust legislation, systems and processes that make it impossible or nearly impossible for people to engage in galamsey.